The last time we spoke briefly about spirituality and about high spirits and about being inspired. And perhaps these three are not so different. To live a spiritual life, to live with high spirits, and to be inspired, I don't think these are three different things. We may have turned them into three different things. We may have turned spirituality into organized religion, into New Age, unorganized religion. We may have turned inspiration into entertainment, into intellection and hobbies and reading various books. Or we may have turned inspiration into art or an art form in its various types. And we may have turned high spirits into something very superficial, a sort of momentary or temporary motivation to be in high spirit, to be upbeat, to look forward to something. And probably by dividing this one thing into many different parts, a lot of meaning has been lost, not only verbally but also actually. To be in high spirits, to be inspired, and to live a spiritual life. Is there any difference at all? And last time we touched on one thing, which is the capacity to be inspired constantly or consistently, to be with high spirits constantly or consistently, versus temporary forms of inspiration or high spirits, which can be easily bought off the counter or through a certain drug or through a certain scripture, through a certain sermon, maybe through a certain therapy session, which merely, if you have observed this in yourself and in others, these are merely temporary forms of relief, of distraction, of entertainment. And usually the underlying thing is either suppressed or most likely suppressed, only to appear in another form or in another emotion, let's say. You might go to a therapy session feeling grief, and then the therapist might suggest certain techniques of how you can manage that. And then after that session, you feel that your grief is easing, thinking that things are getting better. You are getting better. You are becoming a better version of yourself. But then usually, or a lot of the times, and this is what one has observed, this emotion, which is being managed by the therapist, and it's the therapist that is managing it, not you, usually comes back in a different form. Grief often comes back as anger, as hate, as anxiety, and so on and so forth. But the therapist and yourself would probably consider the management of grief as a success. And then, other emotions, you probably not relate them to the management of grief. or the lack of management of grief thereof. And so I think it is very important to ask yourself, it's not that it's important, I think it's absolutely urgent, absolutely urgent to question, not to ask, to question. And there's a difference, I think, because asking questions has an intellectual tone, but questioning is more urgent, has more fire in it, has more immediacy, has a much bigger need behind it, emotional need. It's important to question. Why is it that we only end up with temporary forms of relief from struggle? Why do we end up with temporary forms of motivation, of inspiration, of spirituality? Why do we feel spiritual for brief moments only when we attend a sermon, or listen to a speaker, or read some script, or take some pill? Why? And is there something beyond? Why do we depend on these momentary intervals of high spirits, of spirituality, of religiosity, whatever you want to call it? Why can't we be free from that dependency, and why can't we consistently be in high spirits? I think the world needs us to be in high spirits consistently. You know, if we were in high spirits all the time, and I say this again, all the time, so I think it's very possible. I don't think if you're in high spirits all the time, you would be violent. I don't think so. I don't think anybody would be violent if you're consistently in high spirits. I don't think the people who are killing other people, or the groups who are killing other groups, or the groups who are discriminating others, are in high spirits all the time. I don't think so. I don't think they are ever in high spirits, because if they were, they would never kill, they would never be violent, they will never be aggressive. You see, it's very simple and it's very basic, but I think this is what is missing in the world and in the individual. Consistent high spirit. And I wish it were easy to, and I think to an extent, or from a certain angle, it is very easy to be in high spirits consistently. I think it's very easy. But also I think because we are born into this society which we have brought about, and our ancestors have brought about in a very corrupt way. I think this corruption is pressuring us not to live in high spirits consistently. I think this pressure is breaking our consistency. Although we have all the time in the world to live in high spirits consistently, we have 70 years, 80 years, 100 years, more than 100 years sometimes, to live on this beautiful planet and to live with high spirits for a long period of time. So we have a lot of time, right? Many years, many decades. Unfortunately, we also live in such a way where we end up feeling that there's little time. Our life is seen from a very narrow angle of the 8 to 5, whether that 8 to 5 is working for somebody else or working for ourselves. This is our day. The sun, the beautiful sun rises, and then the beautiful sun sets hours later. And so many things happen in this interval. Nature thrives in these daylight hours and evening hours. So many things happen. Evolution, which is millions of years old, billions maybe, does so many things during the day and during the night. And yet we hardly do anything during the day and during the night. And whatever we do seems to be very meaningless, seems to be very corrupt, selfish, self-centered, destructive, That's what we end up doing. Show me one animal, one plant, one natural element in our universe that destroys and not creates. Whatever we create, unfortunately, is merely silly. We create bridges, we create cities, we create weapons, we create rockets, we create computers. And although computers have or can make our lives very easy and can really be used for good, we end up using our technologies and our innovations and our inventions to destroy each other and to destroy the planet and to destroy animals and to destroy beautiful forests and rivers and lakes and seas and oceans. That's what we're doing. That's what our day is. And also our day is spent being destructive emotionally, engaging in destructive habits, addictions, anxieties, compulsions. We end up or spend a lot of time conditioning our children and our friends. That's how our day is spent. Notice even when we give advice to our children or our friends, notice how that advice is really a form of conditioning, a form of molding the other to fit into the pattern that we have been living. It's the pattern that society has been living for ages. The same pattern, only in different shapes and forms and flip-flops and, all sorts of exotic names and labels, or traditional names and traditional labels. Is there something more? Question it. I don't think we have to live like this. We mustn't live like this. What are we giving our children? What are we giving the next generation? What legacy are we giving? Merely the same legacy that we ourselves have received. It doesn't have to be this way. Question whether it's possible to live in high spirits all the time, even when you are sad, even when you are angry about something. If you are angry about something, and if you are angry with high spirits, that anger will never turn into violence. I really hope you can observe this and see this and do this and experiment with this. Not as a project, silly project or another technique. Please, this is not another technique. It will not work. If you set about doing this as another technique or another how, notice if it works. Actually go ahead and try it out. But keep observing. Keep noticing if it's working out or if it's merely, suppressing the actual thing and masking the actual thing with some silly positive word, whereas anger and violence and aggression are still boiling at your core. Hatred is still boiling, still lurking underneath in whatever you wish to call it, the subconscious, the unconscious, it really doesn't matter, these various names that they give. I think it's very possible to live in high spirits all the time. All the time. And I don't think there's a method for that. There's no recipe for that. I think one must drop all notions of goodness, of faith, hope, an ideal society, virtue, values, etc. Drop all notions of that, because we don't live according to those values and virtues. We live completely differently. We don't live with love. We don't live with peace. Not only peace in the battlefield, but peace of mind. We don't live with freedom. On the contrary, we live with struggle, with violence, with aggression, with anxiety, with compulsion, with meaninglessness. That's how we live. So I think it's important to just basically observe our lives and see, and start from there. Start from aggression, start from violence, start from conditioning, or whatever it is that's actually happening, without really putting any names, and simply observing and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And I think an important point here is, as one is observing, because it's fairly easy to observe, and yet if it were only about observation, then why don't we see more peace, more love, more, or why don't we see those things dominant in the world? Something must be breaking that observation. Something must be a barrier. There must be a barrier. There must be an obstacle. Of course there is. Otherwise, the dominant way of life would not be violence. The dominant way of life would not be 8 to 5, running to do meaningless jobs or pushing meaningless products and services down each other's throats, shipping those products and services across the globe, creating more pollution, destroying the earth in the process, destroying each other, causing illnesses, diseases from the various poisonous products that we eat and ingest every single day. We ship it from east to west, and from west to east. And what do we ship? We ship products that cause us cancer. Not to mention the pollution that's being caused. The earth has turned into one highway, traffic highway, with so much pollution in the air, in the sea, on land, in space. Our atmosphere is congested with satellites, much more than ever. There's a huge traffic line which we don't see, which we don't even see. And all of that is really part of our destructive way of living. It's important to observe. So I think something must be stopping that. Let's not hide, or let's not merely brush all of that aside and simply be positive about it. Positive psychology has not taken us anywhere. Positive psychology is about merely escaping our reality and going into some fantastical world, idealistic world, and a world full of ideas. And through ideas, ladies and gentlemen, we have not reached anywhere except our own demise. So it's important to observe everything around us, but also everything inside of us. Our ideas, our thoughts, our gestures, even our whispers. I think if we can observe even our whispers and gestures and sighs, and where we look and where we don't look. And I mean also by merely our eyes, where our eyes are looking and are not looking. If we just observe that, including observing the way we try to control our vision, our ideas, our thoughts, and if we see all of that, I think we might be able to see more. We might be able to see closer. This mechanism, this human mechanism, which is governing all of this way of life. Human way of governing all this life. We're not merely talking about governments, those governments, and then as something separate from us. We are the governments. We are the human is everything. So it's important to, I think, without having a closer look at this human mechanism of our way of life, or what's orchestrating all this way of life, I think it's going to be very difficult to change that, and change that radically.